Okay, hi everybody. I'm Gerald Labuschagne and welcome to Zulu Alpha Firearms channel. Today we have a really interesting episode. So about a week or two ago, I was at the War Store in Rosebank area doing some filming, and the guy there, Alan, mentioned to me that I really need to come to Firearms Group down in Kew, Johannesburg. And I wasn't sure. I'd never heard of these guys and I didn't know what they do. So I came here, had a quick visit, and it's quite phenomenal. In a nutshell, and I'm going to let the owner tell you more about it, they pretty much produce and source firearms for movies amongst a whole bunch of other services that they offer. So today, we're going to be with Bruce Wentzel, the owner, and find out a little bit more about what they do. Bruce, welcome to Zulu Alpha Firearms channel.
Thank you.
Just to get into it, before we go into the shop and your business and what you guys do as your main sort of source of income, how did you personally get into the sort of world of firearms? Where did your interest start?
That started as a child. My father was a bit of a gun nut and a historical nut. History and firearms has always been an interest of mine, and in I started working on firearms in before the 70s as a schoolboy, and then I went to the army. I joined the British Army in 73 and became an armaments technician, so became an armourer in the army, and from there I've been then qualified as a gunsmith, and I've been a gunsmith all along. So along comes somebody and says, "We need some guns for a movie." And I thought, that sounds like fun. I had a shop in Durban, so I procured some scrap weapons, rebuilt them, converted them to blank, because everything we use just fires blanks. And in those days, it's simple, let's try something. So I grabbed a giant video camera in those days, took a few shots, came up to Joburg and offered my services to a movie. I thought it'd be something different. Before that one was finished, I'd pick up another contract. So I spent 4 months living at the Indaba Hotel. My wife and the family said no, they moved up to Joburg, and that was 86. And from then it's just grown and grown, just doing movies.
So was there anybody else doing this kind of thing at the time? Where were people going to find firearms for movies?
They were borrowing, doing it badly. There was quite a serious accident many years ago with a badly made blank. One of the actors got shot with a wadding and it damaged a kidney. So no one who'd been doing it had the qualifications. So it was, it's just a gun with a blank, it's not going to kill. Well, we know that blanks do kill at close range. And so being a gunsmith, and instead of just fixing broken guns or something like that, you could now get creative. Somebody says, we want a gun that folds up, we want a gun that does this. And that's the part I enjoyed, is creating something, trying to find something new. And that's how I got into it, and never went back to my home in Durban.
Okay. And I mean, 1986, I mean, obviously South Africa was a very different place. Were the productions then mostly sort of local stuff that was taking place?
There was a lot of overseas work as well. In those days, there was the film subsidy scheme. So the way to raise investment to make a movie, if you invested in a movie in South Africa, you got massive tax breaks.
Okay.
And matching foreign finance. So it was quite a good system, but it was abused, like anything can get abused. So what they did was they stimulated the film industry in those days. Going back, Peter Fonda was out here, Freedom Fighters, there was New Metro, which is New Metro in those days was Canon International. We've all seen it, in the title, Golden Globus Group. So there was a lot of work in those days.
Okay.
99% of our work in those days was B-grade action movies. And people say, I saw your name on a movie. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I was in a hotel. People watch, and it's grown. The industry has changed a lot. Become a lot more formal with bigger productions from all over the world.
So 86, you start formally kind of doing this as a kind of a full-time job.
Full-time job.
What kind of really you must have worked on thousands of productions since then. What are the kind of more recent big ones that would be of interest to sort of our viewers?
Lord of War was a while ago. Expendables 2 contacted me. They had the weapons, but they wanted armors, and they said, could I come and do the job for them? I said, no, I'm not going to go live in Bulgaria for 3 months. So I said, I'll send you technicians. They said, no, your gene pool. So I sent my brother and my son.
There you go.
So they got the gene pool, and we did Expendables 2. The weapons came from the States. So now it's more international. Shipping weapons across international borders is still a nightmare.
I can imagine.
Last year we finished season 8 of Strike Back in Croatia. The year before we did Strike Back season 7 that was done in Malaysia. So we supplied, again, technicians, because in Croatia they have a lot of weapons there, and I had to go and look at them. Some of the problems we encountered was they've got the weapons and say, no, it's no problem to make them shoot blanks. I say, you don't just block the barrel, it's a lot more. I don't want to get into the technicalities of recoil operated and gas operated, to the effect that they needed extra pistols, and they had to fly me back for a week to convert 4 pistols.
Wow, okay.
So, because they had to go there, and when they blew the first one up, they said, oh, can you come out here and do it for us? I said, okay.
So often it's the technical advice, and other times it's the firearm and the technical.
Firearm and technical. When we started in the industry, one of the requirements for working for us is you'd have to have done national service or military service. Well, finding youngsters today who want to go into the industry who've done military services, it just doesn't exist. And now we used to do military advising as well. But now that's a separate department. A military advisor, we make sure that the correct weapons for the period go onto it. And often they'll say to us, oh, it doesn't matter, we want that one. But that's wrong. They don't worry about it. So they can't always blame the armorer for the wrong weapon.
Yeah. So it's been things like Lord of War, Expendables 2, Strike Back. I think Black Sails, was that
Black
what's the one?
Sails, this is actually the part of the Black Sails armory. With Black Sails, to get the volume of muskets that you see on the big battle scenes. The last season was the most challenging. And the simplest line in the script said, and the Spanish arrived. Well, what's the problem? Try and find a replica Spanish musket on this planet that don't exist. So you had to assemble parts. We made a prototype, and we then had to manufacture 65 Spanish muskets, of which 45 had to fire.
And that kind of leads me to my next question, because you don't just source actual real firearms that can fire. You make, if something needs to be made.
We manufacture, as a gunsmith, I'm allowed to manufacture mainly in the black powder line. But often when you can't get something, you take an existing firearm and modify it extensively to look like something else.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be right, it has to look right.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of interesting things in the movies. One of the things that all directors want is big muzzle flash.
Yeah.
And you say, but that's not real, is it? Well, there's a reason for that. If I pulled my pistol out and fired a shot into the ceiling, we're all going to go, wow, that's loud and powerful. You can't do that in a theatre. So what you do is you take an audio cue and make it into a visual cue by putting big muzzle flash. So that's how powerful the gun is, because it's got big muzzle flash. That's why military developers spend millions developing systems to cut the muzzle flash for night battle. We spend as much time trying to make it bigger with the same round. So it gives an audio cue to a visual cue. So
in essence, you're kind of historian out of your own interest, but also because of the job requires
pure
it.
Passion and
You're scientist, you're engineer, gunsmith, of course. It's actually a huge encompassing kind of set of skills.
This is it. Well, when you think of a musket, take a musket, everyone knows you pour powder down, but how did the military do it? Well, you've got to have a paper cartridge. And paper in French is cartridge. And that's where the modern word cartridge comes from. And on muskets, you had a paper cartridge, because they didn't issue powder horns. The frontiersmen had a powder horn or a powder flask. But troops were issued with paper cartridges, light, pour the powder, spit the ball down, take the leftover paper, ram it as wadding, present, and fire volleys.
So now you said you do make some things, because you're a gunsmith, obviously, and you make them according to what the specifications of that movie or production are. Now the real firearms, where do you kind of end up getting those from?
Okay, you can often buy various parts, firearms, rebuild, manufacture. On muskets, you source tubing to make locks in India and then make the woodwork ourselves. Normally on semi-automatic rifles, what we do is we purchase them and modify them to look like military weapons. And then sometimes we have to reload specialized blanks. One of the reasons is when you have a big battlefield and the camera's far away, muzzle flash is hopeless in the African sun. One of the big problems you have in Europe, it's always overcast. You can get nice muzzle flash out of a weak blank. Whereas here, the sun, the bright sun, eats flash, so you use a smoke blank. So you see lines of troops there firing puffs of smoke for Boer War battles or things like that. So, as I say, it's a lot of different things. Then, what does the pouch look like? How do you carry those paper cartridges? So, the interest in military history has helped me a lot. I like to say that my hobby is military history. I get paid for it.
There you go. I always say it's not work if you're getting paid, if it's your passion.
This is it.
So obviously we're focusing on the firearms today, but and you kind of alluded to it, but you don't just do the firearms. You would then provide collateral services also.
Webbing, the webbing, various little props that go with it, which we have a bit more expertise, whether it's being lighting a fire with a flint and steel, how to use a firearm. It's one of the things we have to teach the actor. I remember many years ago I worked on a job, and I was given quite a pleasant young lady, and her job was to be an Arab terrorist or Middle Eastern terrorist. And she picked up a gun and went like this, and I said, oh no, that's wrong. You've got to do this and look good. And I spent hours and hours training her. This was a job in Scathos, Greece. And she got very proficient. I bumped into her about 2 years after that job, and now she's a housewife, okay, who opens the drawer and takes the gun out, and it gets kicked out and knocked out of her hand, okay, because she's a scared housewife. She reached into the drawer
and kind of fell back into her training.
I said, no, stop. Do you remember before we started the training, you had to do this? Because they've got to take that gun away from you. The way you've just behaved now, no one will ever take that gun. And the director was going, whoa, that's proficient.
So you had to untrain her.
I had to untrain her and say, pick it up and go like that. And the gun got knocked out of her hand. So I just found that fascinating. The same person had taken from this to this and then back to this.
So in the end, it's an all-encompassing service. It's not just here's a gun, you guys use it on the set and take it back. You provide the history, you provide the style, the tactical stuff, if the tactical manner of using it, if that's required, etc.
This is it.
Obviously, safety being an important aspect.
One of the most important aspects is some of the disputes. People don't, there have been actors killed by blanks and by
Brandon Lee, I think.
Brandon Lee was actually killed by prop bullets being left in a chamber. Okay, it's quite an interesting. I met someone who was on the board, but other actors have been killed at close range. That muzzle flash you see is white hot, high pressure gas. That's how a cutting torch works. So you don't want a gun stuck against your body. And there's ways of cheating that. Often in a building, in a room like this, you use a much lower powered blank. Okay, but when you're in wide open spaces, you have quarter loads, half loads. So there's different loads involved for different effects. Camera says, I want a shot from the front. So you're going to say, bang, and there's 4-foot flame coming out the front of the gun. He's going, I'm not standing in front of that. So you would use a much lower one. And the length of a flash doesn't matter if you're straight front on. There's ways of using different flash hiders, which is the end of the firearm, which is a flash diverter, so it makes it into a star flash. So half the flash goes sideways into a star and a small one going forward, so it's safer to bring the camera close. So all of this is part of it.
So in the end, your special effects too, it add on to your
weapon effect,
label.
more than special effects. Special effects can be from explosions to a log fire to a bit of dust. So it's weapon and weapon effects is what we have to try and do.
Now, obviously, we're standing in an armory, and if people who watch the show will know that I have a thing about standing in a gun safe amongst guns and talking. So we're going to have a look now at some of the weapons that have been used in productions. There's 2 safes we'll have a look at. You've been very generous to let us actually have a look at both of them. Some stuff we're not going to be able to show you for certain reasons, but have a look at some of the stuff. And again, more knowledge that you've probably forgotten more than I'll ever know. So last time I was here, I felt like a real absolute idiot, because to speak to someone with this amount of knowledge kind of rattles you and you end up saying stupid things. So hopefully I won't embarrass myself today. I've done a bit of homework also. So we have a look at some guns. Okay, Bruce, what would you like to show us here?
Just show you something interesting. When I mentioned earlier black sails, that is a Spanish Catalan musket, which was manufactured here.
So every part you manufactured?
No, I found surplus barrels, the locks I found, and then the trigger guard, wood, barrel bands, everything we manufactured here. This is shoe lining to make it look like buff leather. So it was manufactured, and this is a firing one. This is the prototype. So we had to make 45 of these that will function.
Wow.
They flash here. Being a migulay lock or a flint lock, it strikes a spark which lights the powder here, which flashes.
Okay.
It burns through the hole to the main charge and goes off and comes out the barrel.
So some of these parts are actual original parts?
Not original, no, they
necessarily?
copied, they're
All right.
reproduction parts. The production couldn't afford to buy 60 of these locks, originals, because they go for stupid money. So we managed to find those. Then what we did was we had to make dummy ones. And
So this would fire a
they
blank?
would fire a blank charge, yes.
Okay.
And then we made the dummy ones. Now the lock on this is made here. It's just die-cast zinc.
Okay.
But it
Yeah,
looks
you can
like the
see-
real
you can
thing.
see, yeah.
So we make them. The wood we use is a wood from East Africa because it's the closest to walnut. Walnut is just too expensive to use for this sort of thing.
And these will be made by hand, the stocks?
We have a copy machine which we manufactured. We can show you that at some stage. But we made a copy machine. Then they're all shaped and fitted and joined by hand. Now, in a movie, you have 3 levels of firearms: practical, dummy.
Yeah.
So the first 5 are practical, then dummy one, and now we've got the guy in the far background who has the same gun but in rubber.
Okay.
That's a rubber version.
Oh wow, yeah, it's rubber, that's for sure.
Okay. And sometimes you are giving guns, you take 50 guys and you say, I'm going to train you how to use muskets. And some guys aren't going to get it and they're going to hurt somebody. Have a rubber gun. It helps keep it safe. So the training days, we do that. So you've got, as I say, the 3 layers. In all movies you have foreground or hero,
Yeah.
close background, and far background. And extra far background, you can give him a broomstick and nobody would notice.
I mean, these are beautiful. I mean, it just I don't know how well it comes across on the camera, but I mean, these are just little works of art. I mean, just
They had to, you see, this shape of musket, muskets like a lot of these muskets you can buy internationally.
Yeah.
But the Spanish Catalan musket, no one's ever made, so that's why we had to make it.
and this was for Black Sails? Which
Black Sails. That was for Black
Sails.
Sails, the last season of Black Sails. What was interesting, we were called in after a few seasons because we've seen Black Sails on the History Channel in this country, whereas it was made for Stars Television overseas. And what happened there was they made the sale to History Channel, but History Channel, before we buy anything, we're going to get our experts to check it out from historical accuracy. And Guns was called in to explain why they were the highest scoring department at over 95% historical accuracy.
Wow.
So that we were quite proud of. Later on, they called us in and said, can't we just use some other musket? And we said, hang on, you were happy that we got 95, now you want, the producer said, you're right, go and make them. Because we've given a quote and they say it's a lot of money to make them for a couple of scenes.
And I can imagine for you that's rewarding to work with people who want to keep it accurate.
Yeah,
and
the History Channel is accurate. You know,
Yeah.
they try and do it as accurate as possible. Sometimes you can't, but you know.
So what else in this room specifically would you like to point out to us?
Just something we made for Black Sails and it didn't feature very heavily is this. And it was a percussion pistol. Okay, and it's for the ultimate pirate gangster. There you have a blunderbuss. But now we're going out for a drink. And this is hard to carry, isn't it?
It's pretty long, yeah?
Very long. So, what about a pocket pistol? And you screw the short barrel on. And now you have a pocket pistol.
For those nights out in the
Well, that's a...
ye old pub.
But hang on a second. You're taking me to quite a bad area. It's not so cool. So I think 2 shots would be better, don't you? So now we have a 2-shot pistol.
Or double
Okay.
barrel.
A double barrel. What happens if I miss?
You need to
blade
make a point,
fixer.
yeah, there you go. And you made this from scratch.
Yeah, this is made here. But now I'm a ship's captain and I have a mutinous crew and you need a thing called a duck's foot pistol.
Well, if you press gang people into your ships,
You know,
you might
so
need it.
now you can intimidate a whole crowd of people because you're waving a pistol across a crowd of people. But if there's 3 shots to come out, it just makes more of an impact.
Wow.
Other guns from Black Sails that were made for them. Again, this is a 4-shot flintlock. Now, at this time in history, everybody was running around with a single shot pistol. So what this did was you could do that, bang, first shot, second shot, pull the hammer back, rotate, and you've got another 2 shots.
Wow. Okay, Bruce, now we're in the safe that makes me the happiest amongst all your safes that I know of, because there might be secret safes that I don't know of. So obviously a massive array. Now all of these started off life as fully functional firearms. They've obviously been adapted to shoot blanks for your purposes of what you do in this in Firearms group. So tell us a little bit about what you've got here, maybe a couple guns that are really particularly interesting.
One of the more fascinating guns is the Carl Gustav M45 submachine gun. And why I say that, in 1975, 76 possibly, I was at OSD Group in Rhodesia, then now Zimbabwe, and I was in charge of a weapons store called the Katangese Invasion Store, which is part of the Belgian Congo troubles. And I was in charge of that army. There were piles of interesting weapons there. And what happened in there is when the UN finally conquered the Katanga province, the mercenaries thought, well, if we're going to get arrested, so they then went to what was then northern Rhodesia, to the border. And the Rhodesians said, welcome, welcome. Just a small technical point, put your guns in a pile. You're welcome to come in, but you're not walking in with submachine guns. These were the mercenaries.
Yeah.
They'd been paid by the mining houses and that. So they all put their guns in a big pile there. They were then put on trucks and shipped to then Salisbury, and they went to the Katangese Invasion Store, and there was all kinds of weapons in there. About 6 or 7 years ago, I went to Zimbabwe to buy up military surplus for movies. So I went up there and found a few Carl Gustav M45s in very poor condition. So I thought, oh, well, that's great. Then we were asked to do a job called Siege at Jadisville. So I started doing the research. I then discovered that they were deployed into the Congo with 303 rifles, okay, and they needed submachine guns. So they purchased Carl Gustavs. So, oh, that's interesting. So we've got to find Carl Gustavs. So what we did then was I had a few, and we started fixing them. One of the things that was interesting about the firearm that I got out of there, okay, is the fact that they have this crudely welded piece of lug onto it. And that takes a British spike bayonet, which was the number 4 rifle that they had. So I thought, oh, that's a modification, but I didn't realize much at the time. Then I started looking at the pictures of troops, Irish troops who were deployed there. And I saw they had bayonets on for guard duty. I thought, I got suspicious. So then what I did was I contacted the Irish Archives. They said, contact the War Museum, contact this. And I went around in a few circles until I found out. He said, right, have you got the record of the guns that were lost in the Belgian Congo? They said, yes. Can you check the serial number? I said, yes. So what we ended up with is this gun was at the Siege of Jadisville.
And for those that don't know, essentially what happened is, as you said, Belgian Congo, Irish troops
were they deployed there, and they eventually had to surrender when they ran out of food and ammunition. And it was kept under the rug for many years because they thought it was disgraceful to surrender. It was the first deployment of the Irish Army. Now what's interesting about this gun having been there were 2 of them from the actual battle that we used on the movie. One of them was issued to an actor who was playing the part of a lieutenant, whose grandfather was Commander Quillen, who commanded that battle. So we have a gun, he's carrying a gun that his grandfather would have seen and commanded during that battle. So these come from the battle and carried by one of his descendants in the movie. And that to me is just history, very cool.
Because I mean, in essence there, you had 155 Irish UN troops, ended up being surrounded by Katangese and mercenaries.
Over 3,000.
And they held them off for 5 days with, I mean, the mercenaries had air support, I think?
They had air support.
Larger firearms?
They had numbers. They had a 75mm howitzer, and they had 81mm mortars. The Irish had 60mm mortars. and they managed to take out their mortar line and disable the weapon.
And actually, historically, it's been seen as one of the best perimeter defenses that was ever done. And tactically, technically, they won. But they were regarded as failures, and only I think.
It was swept under there, and they only got sort of recognised for what they did achieve because it was all you had to surrender. Well, if you have no food and ammunition, what are you going to do?
Yeah. And I think it was in the 2000s that they were finally recognized. And I think Quinlan died in 97.
Yes.
So posthumously, he eventually
was recognized. I mean, when he arrived there, the first thing he did is took a look around and said, hang on a second, dig trenches now. And dug trenches and created perimeter defense. He did a superb job. And the fact that he died with this dreadful secret that they brushed it on the carpet until the truth came out. They had no choice.
That's unfortunate. Politicians getting involved in
when
war.
Politicians get involved. If you think about it, when they surrendered, the weapons were taken by the mercenaries who then carried them because it was a superb submachine gun. And when they got to the Rhodesian border, they said, you, put the gun in the pile. They put the guns in the pile, and that's how 30 or 40 years after they were in that store, I go and buy them and use them on the movie about the same conflict.
And it's a really great, I watched it the other day coincidentally on Netflix, it's really worth watching. And coincidentally, I come into a bit of history here.
Yeah.
So what other sort of interesting ones, or perhaps ones that you used on well-known movies, do you want to point out to us?
Maybe we had to cobble up that. This is a highly modified blank firing Maxim, and what we had to do with that is make it look like a German one.
Okay.
So all the bits you see around it are all fake, but the concept is it was for the History Channel about the First World War. It was the last American to die in the First World War. Okay, and he died of bad timekeeping. And the 11th day of the 11th month at 12 o'clock, the war will end. At 5 to 12, he said, no, they're not going to shoot. And the guy said, listen, these are Germans. He went over there, they fired warning shots. He said, no, the war's over. Maybe his watch was fast, and eventually they scribbled him. So he became officially the last American to die in World War I in battle. Because he came over the top of the trench 5 minutes early. Yeah. And the Germans are good timekeepers. What we try and keep in the armory is one working blank firearm and one dummy. So it just improves security. So technically, if you're sitting in a car driving down the road with a cameraman, you can't take a gun because the armor must be present. So if I give you a deactivated one or a dummy, you can drive over the hills and far away. But the working weapons under South African legislation must always be under control of the armourer. So that's why when you want to hire a gun, you say, you can have a deactivator or a dummy. But the day you want to fire, the armourer has to go with the ammunition and the paperwork and control the scene.
Okay. And so your AKs, for example, do they come from different countries originally?
All over, wherever. When anybody's selling an AK, we buy one.
And would you buy it as a fully functioning and then adapt
it? You buy it fully functioning, adapted to blanks, and a lot of them we buy are deactivated.
Yeah.
We imported 2 crates of AKs that were British spec DEACs. So a DEAC is a deactivated firearm, so it can never be made to fire again.
And you just hear about these and people contact you and you're kind of, I suppose, on sites looking.
Yeah, but you also go to websites and somebody's got a gun they're selling. Everybody wants to own an AK, but not everybody can get a license. So you can sell your AK 3 times. Yeah. Before you sell it 3 times, and the guy doesn't get a license, you've got to give refund. So I'll pay 10 Rand cheaper, but I have a better chance of not asking you for a refund. When you look at the M4s, you look at M4s, the M16, First Gulf War, Second Gulf War, Vietnam, the weapons change, even though it's the same weapon.
Yeah.
So we use a lot of bolt-on and add-on bits to convert our weapons to different looks for different periods. We did a thing called America, the Story of Us, which is one of the tougher jobs we did. The first weapons we used were matchlocks, Jamestown, 1609, 1699, matchlocks, 1609. And we went all the way through to Normandy, D-Day. So every episode has different weapons. and there's frantic panic, because sometimes you can use the same weapon, but it has to be redressed.
Yeah.
So every week, each episode has a different weapon, and that is quite challenging. Okay, we finished with this now, we want those. Well, hang on, I've got to do some work on them. So the preparation on that, Leave No Man Behind was another one, about pilots shot down all over the world and they're trying to...
Okay.
I don't know if you've seen that, it's a very good series that was done. So from that point, it's quite difficult to keep the continuity going, because you've got M16 A1s, and the next week you need them to be the same gun as M16 A2, so you put a sleeve on the barrel to make it heavier, change the carrying handle, change the hand guards. And they said, but no, we're starting episode 2 tomorrow. And they said, well, hang on, really? So those ones are the hardest. Where a movie that's 3 months and they want these guns. It's when every week it's different.
Yeah.
It gets quite challenging.
Because I mean, it's from Uzis with wooden stocks to MP5s. I saw some Tommy guns.
Yeah.
Obviously LMs, FNFALs, Gs, the Eckler & Kochs. I mean, the list is endless.
Yeah. It's always changing. And we try and keep a representative sample of all the different pairs in history. If you look at the Germans in the First World War used a Mauser. In the Second World War they used a Mauser, but they weren't the same. The First World War was a Gewehr 98, which is much longer and has a very, very different sight. In the Second World War they used the K98, which is Carabiner, which is a shortened one. Then you look at the British in the Boer War, used the long Lee and the Lee Metford. In the First World War they used the SMLE, short magazine Lee Enfield, and then they used the number 4, then they used the jungle carbine. So there's all the different weapons, and this is where we were talking about the 303s earlier. Those are all 303s. A lot of them are dummies and DX. And one of the things we have to do is, because of the cost of the weapons, to go out and buy an expensive original and deactivate it, because we need dummies. We started producing them. Magazines cost hundreds of rand. The magazines on that rack there are plastic.
Now, Bruce, I have to ask. You've worked with obviously a wide range of very well-known and lesser-known actors in your career. Any particular little sort of anecdote you'd like to tell us about one of them and their firearm behavior?
So one of the first guys that did not have a lot of weapons knowledge, but was passionate about learning, was Dolph Lundgren.
Oh.
Dolph Lundgren, when he did Red Scorpion, came out, and he spent weeks on the range firing rifles, and to the effect that when he was doing Red Scorpion, he could talk to you and strip an AK and reassemble it without looking at what he was doing.
So all thanks to you.
The interest was there. So the ones that are professional they come for weapon training, and a lot of them will just say, "Give me an AK, put it around, load it," and go, "Okay." That's not training. The better ones will want to change magazines themselves. If the weapon malfunctions, clear it. And so those are the ones that are really professional, want to become proficient with it. So it's like second nature. A lot of them will walk around the set, because as soon as they finish filming, you take the gun away. No, can I keep it? And they carry it. Yes, this thing's uncomfortable. But what happens is they become proficient with it, so eventually it's uncomfortable in this hand, he tosses it to this hand. And when they come out on camera, they do look good.
Which is what the people using it would have probably experienced the same
because,
frustrations.
I can carry a gun all day and it doesn't bother me. Little tricks. There's things in movies, when you fire a handgun. Now, if I do this towards camera, look where my face is. I'm aiming down the sight. Now, that doesn't matter, does it? My face is obscured by the gun in my hands. They pay me sixpence to be on camera. But the top name actors in the world are millions. So when they shoot a pistol, they shoot head up. Okay? Because that's the money shot. So that's why sometimes but he's not aiming that gun properly. So they shoot head up so you can see the whole face and got a gun in it. So these are little cheats that one does. I remember an actor, no names mentioned, we were doing a scene and I went up to him and said, right, you got to step out and you got to fire 4 or 5 rounds, okay, and fire 4 or 5 rounds in one burst. He says, listen, Sonny, I was a mercenary in the Congo, and you're only supposed to fire 2 or 3 shots. I said, yes, this is not the Congo, this is a movie. And we weren't filming on video, it was cameras.
Okay.
Now, I said, now the problem with that is in the old rolls of film, you have a shutter. Now, you can sync a shutter that the guy fires half a magazine and you don't see any muzzle flash because when the gun flashes, the gun does that, so it doesn't pick up any muzzle flash. And the way to do that is you fire 4 or 5 shots, okay, and your break in between is different, so you always pick up some muzzle flash. I said, this is a movie, so I never thought of it that way. So if you'd gone, so when the editor's going, there's no muzzle flash. And in those days, to put muzzle flash in was very, very heavy. You would sit there with a pin. And so I remember one particular scene on a movie where 2 guys kicked the door open and each emptied a full magazine of an R5. The one gun on the left had a flame this out, the other one never saw one flash. It had synced with the camera. And you work out the 28 frames per second or whatever it is. You can sync it. And I've heard 2 theories from cameramen, and I've never been able to get the bottom and said, I saw lots of muzzle flash, that means it's on film. And the other one said, I saw no muzzle flash, and that means it's on film. And I've never been able to ascertain the truth of that. But muzzle flash, capturing muzzle flash today is easy with digital.
Yeah.
You don't have that shutter as the gun flashes. So if a weapon's firing at X number of rounds per minute and it syncs to the camera, you can sometimes see no muzzle flash comes in because it's slightly out. The camera's only at 28 frames a second, the weapon's firing at 29, so it sinks and then starts to go out, see muzzle flash and then it disappears again.
So you don't have to be just a firearms expert and all the other things I mentioned earlier. You've got to be a film expert to some degree.
You've got to know something about filmmaking, and there's no guideline. Blank technology pertaining to the movies. There's not one book published on this planet. I could publish a book. I would sell 30 copies to all my opposition all over the world. And if they published one, so there's no book. It's not something you can get a book and learn and do it yourself.
They're paying for your experience.
It's just a school of hard knocks, research, lots of mistakes, learn from your mistakes. So that's sort of the best way about going about it. You get given sometimes they say we have a character, we need a Colombian drug lord, what gun can we give him? What would you give him? He's a bit flashy, so now isn't that a drug lord's gun?
Without a doubt.
So we have to have different types of firearms for different applications. Mother of pearl grips. That was presented to him by another drug lord in its case. If you go earlier, there's another one. This type of.
So did you guys do all the detailing?
No, these I bought. We have engravers here, but it takes too much time. Actually, if you buy a second-hand one, everybody looks, I don't like that, so you buy it on an auction.
Yeah. Out of all of these, is there one particular favorite one in this safe that, for whatever reason, stands out for you as with a particular feeling towards that particular firearm?
Yeah, the muzzle loaders, I enjoyed having to set up and manufacture 65. It's a serious challenge. We're not a production line manufacturers, and most of my armorers are not at Gunsmith. So it's a case of teaching each guy different parts of it and manufacturing the stocks. But to make the stocks, we needed the machines. So we had to make the machine first. And the guys designed and made up a little machine.
So that start to finish put a piece of art in a way.
Yeah, it created those muskets. I mean, the brown bess muskets, for earlier seasons, we made another 100 British brown bess muskets. And there was a lot of learning in it, but it was satisfying.
Great. Bruce, thank you very much for your time. A lot of stories here, and I think we might be back in the future to cover some more things that you guys are doing.
Find some more junk.
So thanks very much.
Pleasure.
I'm Jared Lobaskachny from Zulu Alpha Firearms channel. I hope you enjoyed today's show. So stick with us and subscribe and like if you enjoyed today's episode, and you will see a lot more interesting stuff from us and possibly from Firearms in the future.